Her name is Zariah Dodd. She was 16 years old, pregnant, and in the custody of the state of Arizona. Less than 12 hours after leaving her group home in Surprise, she's found shot to death at a Phoenix park. More than a month since her murder, we break down what we've learned so far, from the night she disappeared to the arrests of her alleged killers and why loved ones believe the system failed her. I'm Justin Lum, and we are on the record. It is a terribly tragic case regarding 16-year-old Zariah Dodd, and so many questions are being raised about how this happened to the pregnant teen who was found dead at a Phoenix park in early July. I'm Fox 10 investigator Justin Lum, joined by Special Projects executive producer George Obi, and we have been covering this case for nearly a few weeks now. It seems like longer because you heard about this in mid-July. Zariah Dodd was found dead, shot to death on July 5th, the morning of July 5th at Marivue Park. We're going to get into the timeline, the disappearance, all of the information that we have now compiled. But first off, I think it's important to mention who she was, who Zariah Dodd was, her background, 16 years old, like I said, pregnant, nearly 6 months pregnant at the time, had been through about 20 group homes, we've been told, and had just been really traumatized by the experience she had. And most recently, she was staying in a group home in Surprise owned by Sunshine Residential Homes, and again was nearly 6 months pregnant with her unborn daughter, Zaloni. I don't know if I'm saying it exactly right, but we've gotten that name from family members, her unborn child, as she was 6 months pregnant. And it is just a sad case because we know that she was excited about her baby shower and becoming a mother, even though she was, very young.
Yeah, I mean, a tragic story. We have a beautiful 16-year-old, her full life ahead of her. But as you mentioned, had spent much of her younger life in and out of different foster homes and group homes. Her and her brother both. She has a younger brother who, for all intents and purposes, DCS had attempted to keep the two of them together for much of their upbringing. We would learn through family that was not the case. Once Zariah got into her teenage years, her brother went off to another group home, and so they were separated. But yeah, we're still trying to track down the last few years of her life, where exactly she was. We know that she was in the custody of DCS. We've spoken to family members who had attempted at various points to try and adopt her. But, again, just a tragic set of circumstances kind of leading up to all of this and what we've uncovered, at least with the last 2 years of Zariah's life.
Yeah, and family members are upset, and we've seen, there's a lot of finger pointing right now, and people who have watched these stories and asked about the family members as well. But as you just said, there were attempts made by family members to gain her back into their custody. There's attempts for her kinship caregiver, who we'll hear from in a little bit, also wanted to get custody of her. But there are different circumstances and factors that led her to being bounced around from group home to group home. And this last group home that she was at in Surprise was because she was pregnant. It's a group home for pregnant girls or pregnant women, young women. And I think this was about March, April, that time frame where she would be placed into that home. Yeah,
we've talked to extended family, biological family. We know that in the last couple of years, that after they were tried to get Zariah and her brother. We've heard from biological family about the younger brother who needed help, special help that they couldn't provide. And then we learned that, yes, Zariah had become pregnant earlier this year, beginning of the year, and DCS has only a couple of homes who are licensed to handle teenage girls who are pregnant. And this was one of the homes. There are resources and supposed to be personnel there that are trained to handle this, as we've learned at this particular home in Surprise. And now we're hearing that Zariah had reached out, as we've learned in all of this. She has reached out to try and get help from others when she learned that she was pregnant pregnant, and then who she learned the baby father ended up being.
Early on in the year, and so let's say this, we'll get into that timeline, but by May 2025, she's in this most recent group home.
We know as of
she's
May.
pregnant, and then just a few months later, she's shot and killed in early July. But we want to take a listen to a very powerful, passionate, emotional soundbite from Zariah's uncle, biological uncle, who we spoke with, Eric Polk. And, you know, he was relieved that someone was picking up the story, but also very angry at what's transpired.
I'm glad you guys are picking up the story because, again, this is her story, but this is many other stories that are happening to these kids and these teens that are not being watched after. How in the hell does a 16-year-old get pregnant in the system?
It's important to note she wasn't just a runaway teen. I think that's the negative connotation that we always gather. Not just people in the media, but people in the public who hear, okay, so-and-so ran away. You know, it's on them that they're missing right now. But there are so many circumstances and just more background and context that goes into someone who goes missing after running away, because this is a vulnerable teen under state protection. And so getting into the disappearance and the discovery, it's a very quick disappearance over just hours overnight. July 4th, 2025, when she walks away from this group home in Surprise. And it's not immediately flagged to the media. We don't just find out about this. All we respond to as the media was to this body found at a park the next morning at Marivue Park, where she was shot and killed.
You know, we've used the term, walked away from the group home. As we're learning, that is an open-ended statement at this point, because there are what we've heard from police, at least in the investigation, and what we've read is that she was essentially running away from the home, that she had asked initially to hang out with someone, her current boyfriend at the time, one of the two suspects in this case, we'll talk about later. She was denied that request, and then apparently she told the someone at the home, look, I'm just going for a walk. Then we learn that there's surveillance video of her maybe climbing out a window and walking off with a hooded subject, a person wearing a hooded sweatshirt. And then they get into a vehicle, and that vehicle drives away. So at that point, somewhere along the line, the home deemed her as a runaway from this home. As we've learned through this process, that DCS has a policy where the home is supposed to call a hotline. That hotline then tells them what to do next. And at some point, we know later in that evening on July 4th, in the overnight hours, PD were notified. Then they showed up to the house to officially fill out and record a missing persons report.
Yeah, we looked into that law, and she was reported missing 4 hours after walking out of the home at about 8 o'clock that night. The group home is then when they consider her missing or a runaway. They call the DCS hotline. And then DCS works with law enforcement, cross reports, and with what they have, I think it was established about a year ago, the MARC unit, the missing children's unit, basically in DCS custody. They work with law enforcement to make contact with family members, whoever they need to, get contact information and figure out where Zariah was. By that time, just after midnight, it's only a couple hours away from her being shot and killed, as we'll reveal in a little bit, and then she's found at 6 a.m. the next morning.
Right. We know that curfew is 10 o'clock at this particular home. I guess maybe pretty standard at most of these group homes. Curfew is at 10 o'clock. We don't know when they called the hotline to report her missing. We just know when
they called police.
Right. We know that when police showed up, again, what was the turnaround? Who knows? I don't know what Surprise police were doing. Maybe they got the call hours earlier. But we do know that they showed up just after midnight, filled out that report. And then, as we know in the media, we get emails from cities all the time regarding runaways. We never received one on Zariah. And as we learned in this process, the family, again, was notified she was listed as a runaway. Sadly, though, they got that message that Saturday morning on July 5th, which now we've learned was several hours after her body had been found at Marivue Park.
And DCS made the cutoff point because they have 24 hours to tell kinship caregivers, guardians, family members, whoever it is that gets the first call is listed as top priority for Zariah, which in this case was a family that was part of the kinship. they made it within 24 hours of notification, but basically just saying she's missing.
Yeah.
And that's it. So there is a lot of time that can pass by. A lot of things can happen. In this case, she was murdered. And I do want to know why Surprise Police did not put out anything, because we know, as we'll talk about in a little bit, a detective reaches out to Phoenix PD on July 9th saying, they believe that the girl that they're looking for matches to the description, or they believe could be the one found at the park. But I would just ask, and I've asked to Surprise Police, did you have plans to put out a missing flyer on the morning of Saturday?
Right.
Even because you did not know at that point.
Well, and they didn't, and most of us in the media didn't know. We were led to believe by Phoenix PD on the scene and in the days following the discovery of the body that the individual found at the park that morning was an adult female in her 20s. And we wanted to know exactly why they used that description when they had no ID on her. They didn't know or identify that she was pregnant. But again, that they at least the lieutenant on the scene, or whoever our photographer spoke to initially, and the emails that came in after that, Phoenix PD were adamant that this was an adult female in her 20s, when we had family members, immediate family members, if you will, of Zariah, identifying her and saying, no, that's her. And then, of course, as you mentioned, it was a few days later when Surprise Police reached out to Phoenix to say, hey, I believe the body you found may be related to our case. We don't know when she was officially identified on the medical examiner's website, but that was really what tipped us off, that this was not an adult female in her 20s, but it was, in fact, unfortunately, Zariah.
It took nearly a month for Phoenix PD to correct the age and to give out her name. That was a day after we released our first report on Zariah, who she was, and how at that point there were no suspects that had been arrested in her case, and really breaking it open that this woman found at the park was a 16-year-old girl who was pregnant. And in those multiple interviews we did, we spoke to her biological father, Silquane Bernard, who went to the scene and knocked on doors after he heard about this shooting.
I don't believe she was murdered there. I believe she was dumped there.
A very quick bite, but at that time we were wondering the same. Was she shot and killed and then placed at the scene where police would eventually conduct this investigation? Now that we have the probable cause statement in the past week, we're able to find out what happened, and there's a lot of forensic evidence that's in this report. Yeah,
and we should note, family was, when we spoke to them that week, we knew again, that Zariah had been found in that park. Police hadn't officially confirmed it. Family were very upset by that. They felt like it was taking police too long to publicly, fix that mistake. Police knew in the days afterwards that Zariah was the one found.
They knew within a week.
Yeah. I'm not here to make excuses for PD. I think part of it was they were close to their suspect. I think if you read between the lines, they didn't want too much information out there to potentially spook any suspect involved. Understandable, but you can see where the frustration is from from family at PD, because you have a pregnant 16-year-old. Why isn't there more coverage? And then they have all these other questions. Why weren't we properly notified? So when you hear from Dad, I think this was before the official announcement of who the suspects were. We kind of had a pretty good idea of who they were looking for. But I think if you listen to that and you listen to the uncle earlier, that was still fresh in their mind. We're talking maybe 2 weeks from the murder.
They're upset because they felt that without putting her name out there, you don't get the same sort of coverage, because, we need factual information, facts from law enforcement a lot of time telling this is what's happening, this is the victim's age, this is the victim's name, we haven't identified a suspect. At that point, we had only been able to identify her, not just through family members, but also we had matching police reports that we were able to get ahead and know that these two incidents, the incident number given to family and then the incident number given to us by police where we would file a records request, they match. Involving the same victim. So now here we are, and we have two suspects that are currently in custody, and they're 36-year-old Jarrell Davis and 18-year-old Jacree James-Gillett. We now know that the father of Zariah's unborn child was Jarrell Davis. Jarrell Davis, again, 36 years old, and he has a history. But as we get into this probable cause statement, there are new details that we're able to find. And I think this part is just very sad because when Zariah was found, it was a guy walking his dog early in the morning and called 911. She was laying face down in the grass, and she was wearing her slippers, sweatpants. Her glasses were on the ground. There was blood. And he didn't know what was going on, but he knew that this was bad, and he had to call 911. And she didn't have any of her items with her, didn't have her wallet, ID, or phone. And as the investigation goes on, bullet fragments are recovered from her head during the autopsy, and that would later match to the weapon recovered from Jarrell Davis's home. And very important here is her surveillance footage captured in that area. Heard a gunshot at 2:24 a.m., followed by this unidentified person entering a Chevy Equinox and then driving off.
Yeah, we just talked a moment ago about the surveillance video showing Zariah leaving the home with someone in a hooded sweatshirt and a vehicle. That same vehicle was captured on the surveillance video you were talking about near the park. They see a figure, hooded sweatshirt, kind of walking around the park, a vehicle, same vehicle description as what was outside the group home, flashing its lights. Then the suspect in the hooded sweatshirt walks to that vehicle, gets in, they drive away. As I've mentioned before, there are license plate readers everywhere in this town, and a license plate reader captured the same vehicle in that vicinity around the time of the shooting. And that was really the start of all of the evidence that police would uncover in that 3-week time frame from the time she was murdered and until the time that those two are arrested. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the probable cause statement.
And the Chevy Equinox is captured in multiple locations, not just by Marivue Park, but outside the Surprise group home. And that license plate was also captured and would match to ownership by 36-year-old Jarrell Davis. So as we go through these probable cause statements was actually pretty lengthy compared to others that we've seen after charges. But what we found here was that Zariah told her DCS caseworker at some point, I want to say before April 2025, because now we have clarification from DCS that they notified law enforcement about her having sexual relations with an adult man in April 2025 and that she was pregnant. But at some point, she discussed what happened December 2024. Zariah told the caseworker she was intimidated by Jarrell to have sex with him because he carried firearms all the time. He was a known gang member, according to her, and she was scared. At the same time this was happening in 2024, she was allegedly given marijuana to stay high. And she's also, probably not wanting to be in the group home. So she's, in a sense, felt trapped and scared. Yeah,
I mean, we know that, she was 6 months pregnant when she was murdered. So you go back, she would have gotten pregnant around late last year, beginning of this year. She's only put into this special group home for pregnant teens by late April, early May. So here she is, 3.5, 4 months pregnant at this point, has a conversation with those at the group home and DCS, says, hey, yes, I'm pregnant. This is who I believe is the father. She's also telling and texting other people other girls at the group home who are aware of who the father may be. And then, as we'll get into, texting another mother of another missing teen. So from that point,
several people knew about him.
Right. But here we go from May, June, and into July. She's only scheduled to have her forensic interview with DCS on July 8th, which, as we know, was 3-4 days after she was murdered.
So is it DCS and police?
Well,
I think the July 8th interview about her sexual conduct, which police agency?
Well, and we know that Surprise police were out at the group home in June. We are waiting to figure out if that's what they were there for. But again, you have a 16-year-old who's pregnant, and she's saying she thought Jarrell was 20. Either way, he was an adult. And that is something that raised the eyebrows of DCS and police over the course of several months when they're trying to learn, all right, who is the father? And as you mentioned, she expressed expressed that when this happened, she felt threatened. So that is, I mean, that's by all categories in the legal system, that is sexual assault and or rape in the way that she describes it. And again, so this whole process of learning who the father was and holding them accountable, at least for DCS's effort, began from what we're being told late April, early May.
Yeah. So that's a question that I would ask DCS and law enforcement, whether it was Phoenix or Surprise, whoever was going to conduct this forensic interview and find out what the nature of the pregnancy was. Clearly, the age speaks volumes.
Yes.
The age differential between suspect and alleged victim here. But DCS knew, and it took that many months to have an interview set up with law enforcement.
Right.
Now, according to what we're being told, they did their job by notifying law enforcement. There are other people who knew about this, and there's other people who knew about the 18-year-old suspect, James-Gillett, who allegedly told Zariah he would help raise the baby. And he was also a friend of Jarrell.
He was, yes, close associate with Jarrell. In fact, Zariah had referred to Jacree as her boyfriend, as you mentioned, said that he had offered to take care of the baby. I do wonder, though, you had these names out there. Anybody who would look up Jarrell, we looked him up immediately and found his previous record of something similar back in 2007 when he was a 19-year-old. He had gotten basically a 14-year-old girl pregnant, had an order of protection against him from that family, violated it, got her pregnant. So he was in the system already. And then at the time that this all was transpiring in the spring of this year, he was currently embroiled in a court case with another missing underage girl who he also had an order of protection against. So whether Zariah, clearly Zariah did what she needed to do, notify those at the home when they inquired about who is the baby's father. But then at some point in that 3-month span, there seems to be a disconnect, at least in my opinion, of law enforcement and or DCS doing enough to find out who this individual was and trying to assess the danger he posed to her. Because had they known, and it sounds like they didn't, they probably wouldn't have let her go out on that walk, if you will, on the night of July 4th, because as you mentioned, 18-year-old Jacree, they knew who he was.
They said no.
Yeah, they said no. He was very well known by other girls in that house, as we've learned. He was known to be related to Jarrell in some form or fashion. And as we'll learn in the other missing girl case of Anaya Morris, those two were closely associated. His name is in a number of court documents related to that. So there is a lot of questions between May and beginning of July that we have yet to get answers on.
When Jarrell was arrested on July 15th, he was located with the other 17-year-old who we've spoken to.
Right.
Her mom. You've spoken to her plenty of times.
Yes.
And she's been trying to get Jarrell off the streets, filed that order of protection, like you said. So the minute that he's arrested, he's with this other 17-year-old girl. Now, when he was arrested, for those who haven't been following, it was for weapons charges because he's a prohibited possessor. At that time, it had nothing to do with Zariah's death, and she was murdered 10 days earlier.
Right.
Because he's arrested on the 15th. But having him in custody and then being able to later find Jacree,
yeah,
and to question him, and that was July 31st, that led to the final announcement of, okay, we have both suspects that we're looking for in custody for the murder.
If you look at the time frame, for those that may not follow this, so Anaya Morris, underage girl, had been located as a runaway, was not really in DCS care, but her mom has been fighting for a year to get police to act on Jarrell. She had an order of protection against Jarrell going back to last summer. He was ordered to stay away from this 17-year-old girl and repeatedly violated that protection order on numerous occasions. And then somehow between the day that Zariah was found murdered, and I'd say within a week or so, I think police realized this is the same guy potentially. So they started looking for him, and undercover detectives found him at an apartment in North Phoenix. They looked and they said, "Oh, that's Jarrell. Oh, by the way, he's with the girl he's not supposed to be with, which was 17-year-old Anaya Morris. Then they pulled him over. They found a weapon in the car, and then they went to his apartment. They found another weapon in the apartment. He claimed that one of the weapons belonged to Jacree, had named Jacree in all of this. And then detectives kept grilling him about the case. They only charged him with the weapons charges. And then, as we learned in the probable cause statement a week later related to Zariah, the ballistics from the crime scene at the park matched one of the weapons found, and so now the pieces started falling into place for police. And then, as you mentioned, the vehicle, same vehicle,
and they saw her stuff. They saw Zariah's stuff inside the vehicle.
Yeah.
And yes, that gun was the Bursa 380 pistol. But as we learn, he says that he dropped Jacree off at the park.
Right.
So the question of who pulled the trigger, it looks like they're indicating that it was the 18-year-old Jacree James-Gillett that pulled the trigger and shot Zariah at Marivue Park. Now, on those weapons charges for Jarrell Davis, you were at the court hearing where Anaya's mom,
yes,
was there.
Look, Anaya's mom has been in every court hearing. She has been adamant to police that she knows a lot about Jarrell and Jacree because, again, this has been, for her anyway, this has been going on for a year. It was short and sweet. Jarrell barely looked in our direction. When he violated a court order late last year, when he was pulled over in Apache Junction, he was in the car was a weapon, belonged to another guy, according to Jarrell. That weapon belonged to a friend of his that was in the car.
And who was in the car?
Was the 17-year-old who he was not supposed to be with.
So multiple times the order of protection is violated.
Right. Jarrell was in court last June related to that case. Mom was in court, and she implored the court, look, if you just go to Jarrell's car right now, my guess is my daughter was still there. And her daughter remained missing until Jarrell was arrested on July 15th.
Yep. So that's several months.
Right. And again, we're talking about, at least law enforcement has known about Jarrell related to Zariah since they showed up at the house in late June, the group home. So there's, DCS has known about that name for a little bit longer than that. So there's some point in mid-June to tragically until the beginning of July, what more could have been done to maybe look at Jarrell and figure, this guy's, we need to get this guy off the streets somehow.
There's so much time that had passed, and he's booked at Pinal County at the time you're talking about late last year when he's pulled over in Apache Junction.
Yeah.
Once again, that's the way to get him is the weapons. He's not supposed to have guns.
Right. And
then he pleads guilty. But part of the plea deal is to not have any contact with the victim, yet he's still
continues
with her.
To
and he's found with her July 15th. But as I said, you're outside court. Let's listen to Adrienne Morris, and she was very frustrated.
At that time, we began engagement with the police. He was lurking around my apartment. I later found out he had been in my home, picking my daughter up in the middle of the night, making very high demands, grooming her to the point where even Phoenix PD said that my daughter was going to need extensive help and therapy. He was on her 24 hours a day, when she could eat, when she can shower, where she could go.
This is a day before Phoenix police announced that they had arrested Jacree James-Gillett and Jarrell Davis for the murder of Zariah Dodd.
Right. At the time that I did that interview with her outside of court, we knew that something was close, right? We just knew that, again, they had Jarrell off the street. At that time, we had heard they were still looking for Jacree. Jacree had actually called police to tell them where the vehicle was that we saw in all that surveillance video, Jarrell's vehicle, but he wouldn't say where he was.
So Jarrell Davis allegedly, there's so much evidence, and I wish we could keep going and going. But he drives back to the scene July 5th as police are investigating the death of who they believe is an adult woman. They don't even know that it's Zariah Dodd. They don't even know that she was pregnant. And he takes pictures of it. He, according to police, was just there hours ago picking up Jacree from this shooting. And he also tells police that Jacree admitted to him, told him that he killed Zariah. And Jacree has also confessed to police, according to investigators, that he only did it because Jarrell Davis ordered him to commit the fatal shooting. Because if he didn't do it, he would be in harm's way for sure. That's according to the probable cause statement.
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking to not only process what happened at that park, but then you have an old man, 36-year-old man, taking a teen who's currently at that point missing, right? Her mom has no idea where she's at. He drives the 17-year-old to the park. She has no idea what's going on. She sees police investigating, but then he kind of indicates, look, this is why you don't trust people, like you said. We would learn later that not only was he taking pictures of the scene, but him and Jacree were sharing news articles
Back and forth.
Days later, when it was reported again that this was an adult female.
And photos.
Yeah, that's not random. That is not by accident.
Before she was ever confirmed to be the
Right,
identity of
publicly,
Zariah
yes.
Dodd, they were exchanging messages. So cell phone records played a lot in this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Zariah's cell phone pinged in the area of Marivue Park.
Mm-hmm.
Then it turned off. Then it turned back on again and pinged in the area near where Jarrell Davis lived. Also, their cell phones would be used as evidence as well as far as cell phone towers. That's going to be huge. But yeah, there's just a lot there to unpack, and police looks like they have a lot of cell phone evidence and other forensic evidence details, the ballistics like we mentioned. But it just makes you question, there was so much time that passed from April 2025 until July 2025 that this could have been prevented.
This, I think, there are going to be, at least from the family's perspective, specifically as it relates to Zariah, we know that she was unfortunately being controlled by some really bad people, and that being Jarrell. We know that that she has said and has texted, and there's evidence to suggest, because one of the counts Jarrell's being charged with is a sexual assault of a minor back in December of 2023. Right. So this wasn't a new figure in Zariah's life.
Yeah. He
had been lingering for a couple of years now. And as we learned through family, that interaction was because of Jacree. Jacree's an 18-year-old. He, as I've heard from other family and associates, he runs with a specific group of people. And somehow he may have been the one to introduce Zariah to Jarrell. But we knew Jarrell has been around her life, Zariah's life, since December of 2023, because, again, he's charged with
sexual misconduct
yes.
with a minor.
Right.
And that was a big revelation to us in the indictment, the charges, saying that it went that far back,
right.
that the first occurrence between December 2023 and somewhere in 2025 that this sexual misconduct had been going on. But one of the incidents that she relays to DCS caseworker is December 2024, where she really felt intimidated and said that Jarrell always had an AK-47 with him. I mean, she was she wasn't even 16 yet. She was 15 years old at the time. So we ask about, is there a total failure within the system regarding, specifically group homes and where teens are consistently running away. We got data from DCS as of July 29th. Those numbers can fluctuate, but there are 115 kids missing, runaway, or abducted under that category. 66 had run away from a group home. And that number could go up and down, but that's a good majority are running away from group homes, not necessarily kinship caregivers, but the majority is coming from these group homes.
And, these group homes really aren't treated as prisons. They're not there to trap these girls or, keep them from leaving.
That's not what it's supposed to be.
No, but as it relates to this particular group home dealing with pregnant teenagers, you would think that there would be some sense of urgency, knowing that, especially when one of those teens was, allegedly, at the time anyway, allegedly impregnated by an adult male. Now we know he was the father, that there would be different protocols to protect these girls potentially, because we know that if you're looking at motive from Jarrell's point of view, because he's already been convicted of this and copped a plea deal when he was 19, not only was he not supposed to have a weapon, but when this came to light the second time that he's done this, there was not going to be a plea deal this time. He was probably going to serve hard time, which again may be why he needed Jacree's help in unfortunately ending Zariah's life.
Again, both suspects are innocent until proven
Absolutely.
guilty, with a lot of evidence that we are attributing to police records and court records. But he has now been hit with new charges, a case submitted by Avondale PD, and recently now more than 20 charges, including sexual misconduct with a minor, having to do with 17-year-old girl that we were talking about previously missing Anaya Morris.
Yeah. This is a case again. Anaya's mom's been pushing for. She figured this would come after the Zariah part of this saga, but again, that came down late last week, and a lot of this is related to again violating order of protection, threats that were made to Anaya from Jarrell, either via text, phone calls,
luring, sexual exploitation of a minor,
right? Taking videos, things like that. That as mom mentioned, her little girl is going to need a lot of therapy moving forward. Yeah. This is a case where, these girls, they are intimidated and they do fear these individuals. And if you look at Zariah's case, you can understand why they're afraid, right? Imagine Anaya walking out of that police precinct that day after she had just been rescued from her captor, if you will, and then hearing that one of the girls that she had heard of and been familiar with had been murdered, and then piecing together, that was where they took me that morning. And knowing there had been 2 weeks between that, she could have been just like Zariah. And I think, as Adrian has told me, that's going to be the hardest thing, I think, for her daughter to overcome, is knowing that things could have ended differently for her, sadly, in the way that it ended for Zariah.
Yeah, it's not easy for her talking about this on social media, talking to the media as well, and basically outing and exposing and giving out her daughter's name. But the bigger purpose here, I think, for her, she would say, is to stop this from happening. And she felt hopeless and helpless, put out, a missing flyer for her daughter. And now she's basically been identified through this. We've talked to her about, hey, can we mention her name? Can we bring her up? Because, she's so tied to Zariah without even really knowing her and meeting her. Zariah and Anaya tied together, and Anaya was at Jarrell's apartment as he told her, according to court paperwork, I've got to go handle some business, and that's several hours before the murder. Yeah,
and Adrian has told us, Jarrell has threatened her, right? It wasn't just underage girls. He was going after anybody who, he perceived as someone targeting him. And, so for a mother, probably no surprise to people watching or listening, she was not going to stop. Again, she did everything she could to find her daughter. She went to every court date for Jarrell, and will be at every court date moving forward. This is what parents do. Good parents do. You understand that things happen. Teenagers are teenagers. But I do believe that part of getting justice for Zariah will involve Adrian in some capacity, because she has been instrumental in documenting exactly the kind of person Jarrell and Jacree are.
Yeah, and let's listen to what Zariah's former kinship caregiver had to say, Richland Fox, about what happened at that surprise group home.
The group home manager didn't go look and see where she was walking to or anything. You allowed a 16-year-old pregnant child who is known on paper that is a runaway to leave. Zariah then got in a car. On the morning of July 5th is when her body was found.
So as we talked to DCS after this, it's clear you can't lock them up.
Right.
But you also see what Richland is saying as far as the history, Zariah being pregnant at the time, and the people associated with her that she was hanging around, which is Jacree and Jarrell. That it's just, that's the hard part. What do? Do you lock them up? You're going out before curfew. They're expected back at curfew. She says, I'm going for a walk, even though it's a blatant lie. And then she's dead.
I think two things. One, the question was raised by immediate family. Why would you let a 6-month pregnant teenager go for a walk on July 4th when it's 104 degrees outside? The other thing would be, why wouldn't somebody walk with her? Mm-hmm. But, again, all questions. When did they notice she was missing? When did they go back and look at the cameras and be like, who is she with? And you just told her hours previously she couldn't go with Jacree. I've said this,
if she takes a walk, you literally could look at the camera and say, okay, what was she walking out with?
Right.
Or did they really believe her at face value that she was taking a walk? It sounds like it, if they didn't bother to check who she ended up leaving that home with.
There are things and decisions they may make for themselves that aren't the right decisions. And it's our job as parents, or again, parental figures, as DCS would be in this case, to hopefully guide them and say, look, walking outside on July 4th when it's 100 some odd degrees, not the best thing for you. Going with individuals like this, maybe not a good idea. And they knew at this point, by July 4th, again, they had heard the name Jarrell and Jacree. That was we know that. We've heard that from DCS, that they were made aware of this months before. Whether or not they relayed that to any of the staff, I guess we'll find out. Hopefully, find out.
Yeah, how many staff members knew?
Yeah.
It's just sad. It's just a really sad story and a lot of questions. To end this, there's going to be a DCS oversight committee hearing that's closed to the public, but that's going to happen on September 3rd. Republican State Senator Werner calling for that, similar to what she did in May regarding the murder of Emily Pike.
Yeah.
Where no arrest has been made in that case. Another runaway from a DCS licensed home. So in this case, they will be addressing what happened here, not just with Zariah, but Emily Pike as well. Rebecca Baptiste, 10-year-old, who her situation was reported to DCS several times. So there's definitely something going on here and people calling for change, and we will be on top of that.
We will. As it relates to Emily Pike and Zariah, in little Rebecca's case too, what are the protocols, and do those need to be changed in any way? But this is one of many hearings that is expected to take place in the coming months.
All right, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications, and we will see you guys next time on The Record.